Leon Edwards needs to retire after his brutal second round knockout against Carlos Prates last weekend at UFC 322. Now we're about 4 days removed since then, and I'm depressed, man. I'm depressed. I mean, look, I know everyone hates Leon, and I'm not going to sit here and argue that he's an entertaining fighter because, look, he's not. Besides having possibly the greatest moment in UFC history, which I think at this point is debatable after we've had so many fantastic moments since, such as the Max Holloway knockout against Justin Gaethje. But either way, Leon's knockout of Kamaru Usman is up there of one of the greatest knockouts ever and one of the greatest moments in UFC history. But Leon is a shell of his former self. He has no confidence, it seems, and, well, I mean, people say he loves to give up. This time he didn't give up. He was forced to give up by going to sleep.
I will remember you.
And I just wanted to talk a bit for a few minutes about the reasons that I think that Leon is done at this level. Now, it's not just because he's been knocked out. Fighters get knocked out all the time. Fighters have been knocked out so many times and they've come back. Alexander Volkanovski got knocked out twice in a row, came back at the highest level fighting Diego Lopez and put on a masterclass. Islam Makhachev got knocked out early in his career and look at him now, absolutely, he's a double champ. One of the greatest fighters of all time. It's not about that. It's about Leon's looking worse every fight and he's making decisions that just cannot happen at the top level. And this is something that he's been doing. In his fight against Kamaru, he took him down in the first round with a trip and took his back. And everyone was like, whoa, Leon's got grappling. People were surprised. Ever since then, he's been making weird decisions. In the Bilal fight, he was just making weird decisions. He felt like he wasn't striking. And then in the last couple of minutes of the round, he goes with the elbows. He's trying to finish Bilal. In the Sean Brady fight, Sean Brady absolutely ragdolled him and then basically forced him into did force him into submission, but it felt like the fight was over long before he actually got the submission. But Leon was doing things like shooting on Sean Brady when he spent the entire fight on his back and then he gets up and then, was it the fourth round or the third round? He shoots in a takedown on Sean Brady. I mean, what is he thinking? And then in this fight, fights Carlos Prates, dangerous striker, on a roll at the moment, super confident. Doesn't have that worry, doesn't fight like he's worried to get chinned. He walks forward, he's there, and he knows that he can put you to sleep. Leon took him down in the first round, spent time on his back, not going to say ragdolled him and beat him up because he didn't, but he was on his back, he was threatening the choke. Yeah, Carlos is doing his, pretending he's not bothered, but it's still, he's given up the position and he lost the round as a result, in my opinion. I didn't actually check the scorecards, but I'm imagining he lost that round. Then he comes out in the second round and Leon starts trying to swang with Carlos. When Leon, we know that he's got no power whatsoever. And I just don't understand why he does these things. Like, Carlos was talking to him in the second round. He was talking shit and he knows, I'm guessing he knows that Leon would bite because Leon bit. As soon as the talking started happening, you see Leon go, because I think Carlos was saying that his leg was hurt, referencing to the fact that they're southpaw on southpaw. So unlike southpaw on orthodox, which kind of takes away the lead leg kick as a really powerful kick, it changes it to southpaw on southpaw. Basically, it mirrors orthodox on orthodox. So that lead kick, you can hit it with your rear leg and really come down and chop it right on the calf. And so Carlos was referencing that he'd hurt Leon's leg. And Leon was like, no, you haven't hurt me, basically. And then just stood there. Instead of doing what he does where he pops and moves, he just stood there, stood still. And then they have a couple of comings together. Nothing particularly happens. Leon's striking looked decent in the first round, but, Leon's not a guy that's going to 1-2 and you're out cold. That's just not what he is. He had the head kick of destiny, which only really works once because it's all people are kind of worried about with Leon. Me and my friends talked about this at the time. It's that short, like, it's not like a Mirko Crow Cop where he has other strikes and then the kick comes and you can't really avoid it. It feels like every time Leon fought after Kamaru, everyone was just waiting for the kick. And he just started throwing it. He didn't set it up like he did um, that time against Kamaru. So it just didn't really make sense. But basically, they're starting to swing, and I'm getting worried at this point. I like Carlos as well, and don't get me wrong, I've given up on Leon. I have. I gave up on him, a couple fights. After the Bilal fight, it felt to me like it kind of proved where he was at mentally. Like, I think he expected to run through Bilal, and because Bilal came and had the performance of his life, Leon instantly broke. You could see in the first round, like, Leon was broke. And then Sean Brady, I mean, that was borderline sexual assault. It just absolutely dominated him and ragdolled him and wrestled him and did whatever he wanted. And then, like, when Leon's shooting, you're just like, what are you even bothered anymore? And this is not talking shit to Leon, because look, the guy's a warrior. He puts it on the line. He went out there to fight. He got knocked out. That's the game. There's no shame in getting knocked out. It's making the decisions that you make that led to you getting knocked out. Now, the obvious one is the knockout sequence. So Leon switches into orthodox, which obviously Leon's a southpaw, probably because the leg was hurt. And Carlos takes the outside foot, which is what you do if you're southpaw and orthodox, steps through with that, because he's got these long arms, through with that, bang! That left cross, it lands right on Leon's chin. And, this isn't a knock on Leon once again, but we know he kinda hasn't got any chin. He got rocked to shit by Nate Diaz and Bilal in the first round. Leon was guarding like this, and Bilal came up with an uppercut. It buckled Leon at the knees. So he's been rocked by Nate Diaz and Bilal Muhammad. I mean, that's not the definition of a granite chin, is it? I think we're all, I think that's okay to say that he doesn't maybe have a granite chin. And he got hit with a good shot, and that was it, smiling on the ground. I mean, I don't know what that was. I don't know whether that was just like his natural reaction or whether he was still kind of there and somehow his reaction was to smile. I mean, you've got to imagine that his reaction after being hit with a shot. I do kickboxing. I've been hit with big shots, not like that, but my reaction's never to smile. So I don't know what that was about, and I'm pretty confused. But yeah, he gets hit with one extra, and he puts him to sleep. He was out. He was out. There's being TKO'd, and then there's being put out cold. He was put out cold, which was horrible to see. I've got to be honest, because I've been rooting for Leon forever. Obviously, I'm a English UFC fan, MMA fan, but, well, yeah, I mean, that's why I was rooting for Leon. Nobody liked him. I thought he was, I liked the underdog story, and I wanted to see him do well because I thought he deserved it. I thought he was a skilled fighter. But now, where does he go from here? And this is why the title of this video is that he needs to retire, because he's just been KO'd, finished. He got finished the first time ever in his last fight. Then he got brutally knocked out, so now he's got a concussion on top of that for the first time ever in his career. It's one thing getting choked out. When you're taking actual damage to the head, what is the point anymore? And look, I'm not saying Leon's worth 30 million quid where he can go and live the rest of his life and have fun, but he's got to be worth a few mil, he's got to be worth at least 3, 4, 5, 6 mil. People manage to make it work. I don't see how he can't make it work. Unless he's not been smart with his money, I guess. But I just don't know where to go with Leon at this point. Like, I'm just so disappointed for him and in him. The guy, Chael Sonnen was talking about how he thinks he's the best fighter in the UFC, skill-wise. And it might be a stretch because I think people like Volk, Islam, Taporia are probably better. Barab, those guys are probably more skilled. I think in terms of strikers, when you watch Leon on the pads, and look, pads don't hit back, we all know this, but when you watch Leon's technique on the pads, I mean, it's as clean as a whistle. You will not find a cleaner pad work. You watch it. I watch Muay Thai guys. I watch guys like Liam Harrison. I watch Nabil Anan, Superlek, Yuki Yoza. You watch them guys on the pads, and don't get me wrong, super clean. But like Leon is up there, if not cleaner. Like his striking just looks incredible. And he never seems to use any of that when he's fighting. All he uses is pitter patter jab, a bit of a cross. I think he caught Carlos with a cross at one point in the first round when they were exchanging, but he's just got absolutely no power. And whether that's because he doesn't sit on his punches, because, like if you proper sit onto a punch, then you're obviously, if you throw a cross and it misses, your chin's there to be spun. So I don't know if Leon kind of knows that or doesn't like taking a shot. Not that anyone does, but he seems to kind of have this fear, or maybe he just has a glass chin. Maybe that is just what it is. But look, he took a great shot off Carlos. The actual shot that put him out was a big shot, so there's no shame in that. But he seems to have no faith at all in his chin, like at all. It's like he gets it with one good shot and he's terrified. But it's just like the game, the main issue is the game planning. Like what is he doing? He takes Carlos down, does really well against him, and then decides in the second round that he's going to swang and bang with him. In orthodox as well, so not in his normal stance. Like I don't think people realize how, there's fighters like Alexander Volkanovski who are incredible from both stances, super rare and unbelievably hard. I'm a southpaw. I spend 95% of my time in southpaw. I switch to orthodox sometimes for kicks, but when you're actually exchanging, I can't. I don't know what I'm doing. It's all wrong because I'm used to this shoulder. This time I don't know what's coming when I throw the hook. Something's coming at the same time. Like you're both throwing the hook at the same time. It's horrible, and I just don't know why Leon thought that was a good idea. And then obviously the mistake of backing out. Backing out with his head instead of his feet. He's kind of like hopping backwards as he gets caught with by Carlos. And people saying it took him off his feet. It didn't. He was already hopping back. But, when you're out of position like that, they're the shots that do get you. You'd be surprised how big of a shot you can take when you're in your stance, as opposed to when you square. For some reason, I mean, I guess it's just the torque on the shot and the speed, but like a shot that wouldn't necessarily rock you if you were in your stance, when you square like that and backing away like Leon was doing, these shots all of a sudden they hurt differently. They really do get you. And I just don't know where or why Leon thought that was a good idea. I guess the answer is that his leg was compromised, but then, you've got to be thinking, right, we're southpaw and southpaw. He's going to be targeting the lead leg. Like, how did that never come into his mind? It's like these things. This is why with Leon, you're always baffled. You just never understand quite what he's thinking, because he makes decisions that just don't make sense. Like being super heavy on his lead leg when he's fighting an orthodox. If I was a southpaw, if I was fighting another southpaw, I'm slamming that kick in. I do, occasionally spar southpaws, and I always slam that leg because it's right there. And it's like, he knows Carlos as them. He's a big lanky guy and he's skinny, but he's like Pereira, where like he's big but he's not thick. He's kind of skinny, and so like when he kicks you, it's like bone on bone. There's no like muscle to hide, to like shelter the bone a bit. So he just slams you with that leg, and it's like being hit by a baseball bat. And it's just like Leon, just his tactic was just to take him. And after dominating him on the ground in the first round, decides to stand there and bang. And I just don't know what to think anymore. And it feels to me like whatever Leon had is gone. He doesn't feel like a fighter to me that can bounce back from adversity. He's not like an Alexander Volkanovski. If anyone is going to bounce back from being KO'd twice, it's Alexander Volkanovski. The guy is a warrior. He has an unbreakable mindset. He is always going to come back. He's relentless. And that's why he's one of the greatest fighters of all time. Leon, it feels like being finished twice in a row and losing 3 times in a row, first time ever being KO'd. I cannot see a route back for him. He's 34 years old. He's been the champ, defended it twice. You know, he had his magnum opus moment against Kamaru, beat him in the rematch, had a terrible performance against Colby Covington, one of the worst fights I've ever seen. I stayed up for that fight, and it were on at the crack of dawn, obviously, in England. I'll never forgive him for that, because that was absolutely terrible. But he had his moment, and it feels like his time is done, because he's never shown us anything in any of his fights, especially his recent fights, that show us he can bounce back from adversity. Because it's not just getting caught, you know, it's not just, fair enough, Volkanovski got flatlined by Topuria, or by Islam. The Topuria one's a better example, I think, because Islam was on, 5 seconds notice. But there's a reason for that. You know, he got backed up against the fence, got caught, bang. It feels like with Leon, but that was Ilya's tactic. You know, Ilya's tactic was to back him up against the fence. Leon gave Carlos the KO by going into orthodox, a stance that he's not comfortable with. Leon fights most of his fights in southpaw. It's not like he's a super switch stance fighter. He can switch stances, but when he's exchanging, you want to be in your stance that you're comfortable with. And yeah, I'm upset, man. I'm upset, and I think it's time. You know, Leon, you were a great champ, kind of, but you had a legendary moment. You're a fantastic fighter, but you don't have the hunger. And I mean, who are you going to fight next? You know? Ian Gary. At this point, I think Ian Gary beats him. Shavkat destroys him. Michael Morales destroys him. Just been knocked out by Prates. Are you going to give him Usman again? Nobody wants to see that. You're going to give him Bilal again? Nobody wants to see that. Plus, he's fighting this weekend. Who else is there? Sean Brady's just been ragdolled by Sean. That's it. That's like most of the top 10. Jeff Neal, maybe. But it's like, then what are you fighting for, you know? For a couple of $100,000 to fight Jeff Neal, which is a dangerous fight. You know, look, Jeff Neal's not a champ material, but he has heavy hands, and like Leon doesn't. And at this point, like, you know, if you'd asked me a couple of years ago, like, I thought Leon were going to dance around Carlos, and I thought he were going to not batter him, but I thought he were going to piece him up, do what Leon does. But that's because I was assuming that it was Leon of old, you know. The Leon now looks like a shadow of his former self, and it's really sad to see. I hope that he comes back. Actually, that's a lie. I hope that he retires. Saves his legacy or what's left of it, and, you know, he had a good go, but there's no point taking more brain damage. You know, you get knocked out again, you keep getting knocked out. What's the point? You ruin everything that you worked for. I mean, it'll be exciting to hear what he does next, but I just don't see the future getting any brighter for Leon Edwards. So that's my thoughts. Thanks again for watching, everyone. This has been Southpaw Stance. Let me know what you think in the comments. Drop a like, and I'll see you in the next one.